I want to talk about Western economic collapse and your investment in silver. Now, I know there's a lot of different things that have been said about this and talking about the banksters, but I'm going to talk about things from other aspects that you might not commonly hear. Now, yes, I think silver will go up to probably several $100s an ounce, maybe over $1,000 an ounce possibly, but that is going to be due to inflation, not exactly hyperinflation. But also for silver to go up to that type of money, it's going to require that there be strong economic demand for silver. And in other words, production has to be high, factories have to be producing, people have to be employed, and the engines of economic progress have to be moving throughout the world. If there's a true economic collapse, whereas there's a production collapse, well, silver is not going to fare well. I don't think that's going to come about, and I think actually a lot of production is probably going to be heated up due to global tensions, the military-industrial complex that exists throughout the world. Now, I want to get into some other angles as far as conspiracies and economic collapse that you normally don't hear of, because there's a lot of focus in on the Western banksters and stuff like this, the financial elitist, and the European Union. But a lot of this stuff is planned from other angles, and this is going to be lengthy, unfortunately. But I don't know how the heck to make it so super short, because it's impossible. Because actually, I'm going to be glossing over things pretty quickly in a lot of areas. Now, I've actually read this. This is a book. It's not really like a novel book. It's actually a collection of memoranda to the CIA that was written by Major Anatoly Glitzen, KGB defector from Russia. Now, I want to point out that this guy's been uncannily accurate over the years. About the only one. Now, he does reveal some things, and this is really where he can get into. He's been actually accused by some of being a conspiracy theorist, but I got to look at it this way. He's been accurate. He's not a Lindsey Williams. He's not snake oil. I don't know what Lindsey Williams is or not, but it's in a totally another league. Now, this book actually was published in 1984, but it's a collection of memoranda to the CIA that dates from the 70s up to like 1980 was like the latest work that was inside the book. So it predated the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall, the reunification of Germany, and the Eastern Bloc nations by many years. And in this book, these things were predicted. They were predicted. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's a lot going on in the world other than what's going on with the Western financial banksters. And I want people to be a little bit more aware of this stuff. This is the second book he came out with in 1995 called The Perestroika Deception. Talks about the restructuring, the openness, the glasnost that occurred in Eastern Europe and in the former Soviet Union became the Russian Federation. Basically, it's all a ruse. And there's long-range plans, but they're working in together with the Western elite. Which Galician, I just cut right to the chase, Galician says that they're playing with fire. The Western elite do not know what the hell they're dealing with. They're actually playing with fire for this new world order, this new world government, this new world financial system. There's other people that want to be top dogs, basically. I'll just cut right to it. Now, I want to get into this a little bit about Anatoly Glitzen very briefly. This is right off of Wikipedia. I'm going to try to make this short, but then I can't make it so short that I am glossing over things too quickly. This is right off of Wikipedia, but I want to discuss, for instance, this book, New Lies for Old, because it's going to explain other things that are going on in the European Union and why things are going the way they are today. In New Lies for Old, like I say, that was published in 1984, but actually the writings in it were from 1980 and back into the 70s. So he warned about a long-term deception strategy designed to lull the West into a false sense of security and finally economically cripple and diplomatically isolate the United States. Now, I've double highlighted that because basically when you have this media outlet called Russia Today, which is actually state-sponsored media. It's not independent. It's directly from the Russian state the Russian, former KGB, the FSB, the FSS, Federal Security Service, and they are basically using that venue, that media venue, to basically put people against the Western elite. Now, I don't say you should necessarily get behind them, but I also say you should not cut them off at the knees either, because you pretty much could be causing your own self-destruction in that way. I just want to point out all angles of what's going on. That is part of the plan, actually diplomatically isolate the United States. The liberalization in the Soviet Union would be spectacular and impressive. He's talking about this years before it happened. Okay? Formal pronouncements might be made about a reduction in the Communist Party's role. Its monopoly would be apparently curtailed. Now, I want to actually, there's another video I did, and I don't really spend, actually I do spend some time making these videos, but they're not really worth it for me to really, spend mega hours putting out something that's really, might require 100 hours of work. But I did a video on a, what do you call it? It was the Georgia Guidestones, and actually more towards the second part of that video. I'm going to link it up right here, because the second part of that video actually displays the link between East and West and what was going on during a time when Gorbachev supposedly, reformed, and he was going against the communists and all this type of stuff, and Russia, the Soviet Union fell apart. Well, the Western elite were working with this character at the same time. Before even all this happened, they actually gave him the keys to the Presidio, which was an old established naval facility off of the San Francisco Hills that was to be used for his Gorbachev Foundation. It wasn't called Gorbachev USA Foundation, and if you actually get into what it's about, you'll start seeing that the West and the East are working together, and they always have been. So all this planning, like by the Russian insiders, is actually being coordinated by the Western elite. The problem is that the Western elite probably don't know what they're dealing with, and that's the assertion what Major Glitzen always says. And then he goes on to state, if liberalization should be extended to East Germany, demolition of the Berlin Wall might even be contemplated. The European Parliament might become an all-European socialistic parliament with representation from the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals would turn out to be neutralist socialist Europe. Now, you know what's going on in Europe right now. This whole entire plan, with the European Union, basically was on the books back in the 50s, right? And even back in the 50s, some revealing things came out about, I forget who it was from again, but it was about the comfortable merger between the United States and Russia. This was, and we had the Cold War for the next 20-something years after this. But there was a planned comfortable merger between Soviet Union and Russia. Between Soviet Union and the United States. It's been planned that way since at least the early 50s or before that. It's about world government. Now, also, I want to even get into the second line here about liberalization should extend to Eastern Germany. Demolition of the Berlin Wall might even be contemplated. Remember Ronald Reagan making that statement, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. That was all a big show statement. That was a big show. This was all known before it was going to happen. The whole thing is a charade. The whole thing is a charade. Now, that sounds a little bit conspiratorial, but I want to also point out that Major Galician, he's a U.S. citizen. I think he's still alive. He's well up in his years. I know he's alive many years after the year 2000, and he was actually working with people within our military. And also, if you want to get information from about him, what he states, because a lot of this stuff is really explaining what's going on globally. You're not getting the information from Alex Jones. It's really from this that if you will find out the information from Major Galician, and one of the best sources of that information is actually through Christopher Story from the UK. Christopher Story. Now, Major Galician he's a U.S. citizen, but he kept him pretty much in hiding by, there's people working with him, but he doesn't go out and make public statements. Now, I want to point out that Major Galician stated that after he defected, that afterwards what would happen was the Soviet Union would send out disinformation, false defectors, and up to that time, Major Galician was the highest ranking KGB defector. There was 2 generals that defected after that when the Soviet Union fell apart, and I forgot their names, but they were nicknamed the 2 Olegs. They both had Oleg in their name. Now, what was interesting about them, that this is where I figured it was a sham. They used to go around university, college circuits, making speeches and answering questions from students, getting paid big bucks by large tax-free foundations in the United States. They would get paid big bucks to make these speeches, and they would answer questions from students. Now, considering they were paid by the Western establishment, the financial insiders, in other words, the large tax-free foundations, and Major Galician basically couldn't stick his head out of the window, to make a speech out in the public. I told me a great deal of where the information, which was accurate and which was disinformation. I also found it interesting that a lot of students were sitting down in a chair slouched asking this general questions, and I was pretty surprised that he probably, on the inside, he was probably getting totally pissed off at the disrespect shown to him by this American dweeb sitting in a chair slouched asking him a question. It was quite amusing because I didn't see it that way. I just figured that anybody that was a general, I mean an American general, would not really particularly like that. I'm pretty much a little bit more familiar with some of the attitudes in the military, first, especially in some of the foreign military. They got some huge egos to be addressed like that. So I figured it was a sham. I figured it was a sham in other ways too. According to about his book, New Lies for Old, which is printed in 1984, it stated that 190 out of 194 predictions made New Lies for Old, 139 had been fulfilled by 1993, and actually several more were fulfilled. New Lies for Old claimed that as early as 1959, the KGB was working up a Perestroika-type plot to manipulate foreign public opinion on a global scale. Albitz argued that KGB was a major beneficiary of political changes in Russia and perhaps indeed directed Gorbachev. And remember, I was stating that Gorbachev basically was working with the Western elite all the time. They always were. He always was, even before the whole thing fell apart. The whole thing is a ruse. And one thing is certain, Perestroika opened up the way for the KGB to advance towards the very heart of power in Russia. Now, as far as Putin goes, Putin comes from the KGB. Now, I can't really get into specifics of who really runs Russia because I don't know. But there was some revealing statements made that I read that, and it does make sense. You'll never see the visible person that's out there with the public. That's the public image. Is actually the very top person. But Russia basically is run by people within the FSB, the former KGB. So it's like basically one organized state-run criminal unit. And Putin's wealth probably is, the 60 to 70 billion as is being asserted, but it's all held in secret. Just look at the pomp and ceremony that was done for his inauguration. What's going on in Russia actually is more a threat to individual freedom in the West than actually what's going on with the Western elite. I just want to point this out. According to Soviet dissident Berkovsky, in 1992, Berkovsky had unprecedented access to Politburo and Central Committee secret documents, which have been classified and are still even now for 30 years. These documents show very clearly that the whole idea of turning the European common market into a federal state was agreed between left-wing parties of Europe and Moscow as a joint project, which Gorbachev in 1988-89 called our common European home. The European Union, although planned by Western elites, is also planned in conjunction with the people that are the insiders in Russia. So The thing is actually a little more complicated than people think. On June 8th, 1995, the British Conservative member of Parliament, Christopher Gill, quoted the Perestroika Deception during a House of Committee debate, saying it stretches credulity to its absolute bounds to think that suddenly, overnight, all those who were communists will suddenly adopt a new philosophy and belief with the result that everything will be different. I use this opportunity to warn the House and the country that that is not the truth. Every time the House approves one of these collective agreements, not least treaties agreed by the collective of the European Union, it contributes to the furtherance of the Russian strategy. In other words, the European Union is actually part of the inner circle's strategy in Russia, not just the Western. I know, like, if you look at the Consul and Foreign Relations flagship publication, Foreign Affairs, you'll see a lot of European Union articles why it be saved, but it's not actually like that. It's actually in coordination with the Russian insiders. Now, do the Russian insiders have their own ambitions? I would think so. It's a little common sense. This is where Major Glitzen says our Western elite are playing with fire. They are playing with fire, and they're stupid. That's what I think. They really are stupid in a simplistic way where they probably are very smart, but they just can't see the forest because they're looking at the trees. This is a little bit about the Federal Security Service. Now, this is where Putin came from. Now, I want to point out that it's from the KGB. Okay. Now, but it's stronger. Now, one of the things I want to point out too here, FSB is responsible for internal security of the Russian state, counter-espionage, and the fight against organized crime, terrorism, and drug smuggling. Organized crime is what? Defined how? Any business that gets big enough that we need the money ourselves, we'll take it over because you're an organized criminal. A lot of those Jewish oligarchs in Russia maybe were criminals, but guess what happened? They went into the hands of a bigger criminal by the name of Putin. And Putin's wealth likely is correctly estimated at between 60 and 70 billion dollars, and he's probably the richest man in the world. The Russian state on the inside is actually super organized crime. It is a criminal cartel. That's what's going on. And they use religion, getting behind the Orthodox Church as part of something with the ceremonies to sway the masses. It's a major scam, and I see it for what it is. And I want to point out just how strong this Federal Security Bureau is, or Federal Security Service is. The FSB combines, this key word, combines functions and powers similar to those exercised by, it combines, like in other words, we have all these different agencies, and they might fight with each other, they might step over each other's bounds, they don't want to do that, and they don't have control of every aspect of what's going on. The FSB has all these combined and exercised by the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, Federal Protection Service, Secret Service, National Security Agency, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, United States Coast Guard, and Drug Enforcement Administration. Now, you think that an organization that combines all those powers together doesn't do some abuses of power? Now, what about Russia today? Are they pointing anything out? No, because they're run by these people. This is what Russia today is run by, the FSB. So, sometimes you get aggravated by a lot of Americans looking at Russia today and they're thinking, oh, they're criticizing our Western banksters. They're telling the truth and CNN isn't. Well, maybe that's partly true, but they're leaving out criticism of their own country. They got bigger criminals over there that make the Westerns look like petty thieves. The Federal Security Service is one of the successor organizations of the Soviet Committee of States Security, KGB. Now, I want to point out that, again, Putin comes from this organization. It's a criminal cartel. That's what it is in a nutshell. That's all it is. Now, I want to point out something else. There was now, when we're talking about economic financial collapse in the West, if there is actually a true economic collapse where you see like production of services and goods curtailed greatly, not just like a financial collapse by the money becoming worth less and less, but the production is remaining high. But if we see a true economic collapse, whereas there's a breakdown of government, breakdown of law, there's food riots and things like that, or Americans fighting each other, your silver is not going to do you a hell of a lot of good, really, in that kind of situation. You should actually be buying food and water storage and even ways to protect yourself and things like that. Because I'll go reference to one of my, actually my favorite, Mark Faber. He even makes references to about if there's a true economic collapse, it'll lead to global war. And the best thing to do is to be away from inner cities and armed and on a farm, basically producing your own food. Sounds like a little like doom and gloom, but you know, I would advise people that if silver goes up and you see your money go up a great deal in silver, and you don't have food storage that's to last you at least a year, I would advise you to sell some of that silver when it has a stellar gain and start stocking up on food storage and things that you might need for first aid and stuff like that. Because if you really think there is a real collapse coming, silver is not going to be the thing you really need. Unfortunately. I think it's a smart investment, and I think before a final clobbering economic collapse, silver's probably going to go up. It's going to be a well-performing asset class, but you might want to trade some of that silver for absolute necessities that you need. What the end game is going to be is, and I'm showing Brzezinski's picture here, is that the Russian leadership on the inner circle is planning for and anticipating a total financial collapse in the West, and their goal is world domination. It's never been deviated from. The dissolution of the Soviet Empire is a fake. It's been that way. It's going to be rebuilt, and it will clash with the West in the future. But it's biding its time. The Western leaders think they are working together with the Soviet insiders, but I think what Major Glitzen was alluding to is that they're playing with fire, and one criminal gang is going to try to get on top of the other criminal gang. So, if you're actually in this game for survival, don't concentrate too much all the way on shiny silver coins. It's a smart strategy, but food and your protection and your energy are very smart things to do also. But number most important is not to panic and actually to prepare in a calm fashion. Now, this particular person, Brzezinski, is at very much odds with the neocons. I know, with the ones that support Israel and things like that. He's like, I heard so many stupid rumors on the internet. I have to go into some of this. Some people say this guy is Jewish. He's not Jewish. He's Polish. I mean, sometimes there's Jewish Poles. There's Polish Jews and stuff, or Jewish Poles, or whatever the heck. This guy's not Jewish. He's actually pretty anti-Israeli in a way. But I kind of did like his strategy, but I don't know how the hell that would work. I just wouldn't do this. Whereas his strategy was to use Iran against Russia versus us go against Iran. I don't know how the hell he could pull that off, but I do like his basic philosophy about isolating Russia and China and whittling down their power, because the people that are running those countries are bad news. They are bad news. I just don't like his methods of doing that, but it's going to be a very interesting scenario because people are thinking about this economic collapse throughout the world, and they're buying silver. You need to do a hell of a lot more than that. If there's going to be a true economic collapse, it's not going to be a smooth like, oh, we just had an economic collapse. You can listen to some of these other people out there. I'll mention one of them, Brother John F. I don't want to knock the guy because he's probably, maybe I'm figuring he is sincere, but I'm going to state this. If there's an economic collapse, it's not going to be like they reset the currency and you have your silver and now you're going to get your new currency. He's a big voice out there purporting this. If there's an economic collapse in the West, it's going to be followed by a global war. That is the reality behind it. And actually this has been planned for many, many decades. Glitzen says they don't just plan 10, 20, 50 years in advance. They'll plan more than 50 years in advance. And that's just how it goes. People have no concept of exactly how that deal is. If there's a true economic collapse, I would suggest you prepare far more than just buying silver, and go ahead and get a hell of a lot of food. Actually, I have enough for well over a year, but I'm probably going to go to more than that. And if you make large gains on silver, if you want to start selling at $60 an ounce, and you don't have a year's worth of food, start buying it. But I just don't want to freak people out, because this stuff's been talked about for decades and decades and decades. But it is going to come about, and the way you're going to tell it's going to come about is when there is a true economic collapse that comes about. Mark Farber alludes to this. He does. There'll be a major economic collapse. And that's where I'm going to see where we're going to have a major global war. And you're probably going to see the old 1950s and 1960s, East-West confrontation scares might actually be a reality. Might actually be a reality at that point in time. And actually, people think that's not survivable. I do say it is survivable quite easily. But people don't have the confidence to, they get into this mode where, oh, well, have a beer and the hell with it. Or, if it's a female, we'll watch a movie or something, get the makeup on. But you need to do things a piece at a time and stay calm about it. But when there probably will be this major, major, major economic collapse sometime in the future, and silver is not even your main protection. Unfortunately, don't sell your silver just yet, but it's going to go up. But as you start selling, you might be smart to get some of the necessities and really stock up on that type of stuff. And I do want to point out, I've been critical of some people, but I tell you the truth, I don't think they're giving it a straight answer. That's why I'm being critical. I don't like the answers that are being given out there. They're not accurate, and they're not really presenting what's going on. Look at what's going on all sides of the world, all sides, all angles. Like I stated before, Earl, I'm going to link this up with something else I did on the Georgia Guidestones. It was like a fast thing I did. Probably about halfway through, it probably gets a little more interesting, but it explains how the East and the West are working together. And it will explain to you long range. It's going to take some time, but this will come about. Just that it is surmountable. That's what I want to point out. It is surmountable.